I started murdering people, there'd be none of you left.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Disclaimer. The following broadcast gives a true and honest account of the events described, and all evidence and details herein are solely factual. What you are about to hear is real and may disturb you. Caution is strongly advised. Welcome to Dead Souls Social Club.
If you enjoy our show and find our research interesting, please leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform. Something that small really does go a long way in helping us out. You can find out more about us by heading over to Instagram and searching our name.
It's a mystery to me. We have agreed with which we have agreed. You think you have to want more than you need. Until you have it all, you won't be free. Society, you're a crazy breed. I hope you're not lonely without me. Lyrics from Society by Eddie Vedder, 2007.
We have all been in that position in life where we question ourselves, where we wonder, what's the fucking point? Materialism, corrupt governments and politics, a society rotting from the inside out. Why do we succumb to society's rules and play a part in the theatre of the absurd? Conform to rules that we never signed up for. If you think about it, from the outside looking in, it's almost laughable, right? Or at least it would be, if it wasn't the cold, harsh truth. Cities made from concrete and glass. Hierarchies of power, for man to overpower and rule other men. Societies of money and greed. Western society has become a virus kept alive on life support, intravenously fed the black tar of 21st century capitalism. Sitting beneath chemtrails of capitalism poison, maybe it's better that we regress as a culture, reset to a time when we were capable of looking after ourselves and cared little of image and swagger. In the year before I attended university, I had my existentialist moment in the sun. Like many others before me, I questioned if conforming to society was the way forward, or if a better option would be to head into the wild. Ultimately, I never went through with the idea. Most don't. But one man did. A very brave man. And tonight's episode is about that man. Alexander Supertramp. Christopher McCandless. For all of its beauty and splendor, the wilderness can be a cruel teacher. Backpacking through the wilds allows you to break free from the shackles and confines of daily routines and obligations. The freedom to choose your own path is granted to you, and it offers you the choice to make spontaneous decisions and explore at your own heart's pace. It's a chance to embrace your independent spirit and lean into pure self-reliance. While backpacking across the country can be a thrilling and transformative experience, the dangers of venturing out into the wilds is a very extreme and treacherous venture. The Alaskan wilderness is widely acclaimed for its vast and untamed natural beauty, rugged and wild landscapes and diverse wildlife. It's no campsite. It's no tourist-friendly national park. Alaska is the largest state in the United States of America and is located at the most northwesterly point of the North American continent. The population of the state is less than the city of Seattle. In fact, there are almost 9 times the amount of people in New York City alone as there are in the entire state of Alaska. It shares borders with the nation of Canada, the Arctic Circle, and the Pacific Ocean. The state's geography features diversity with huge towering mountains, expansive glaciers, dense forests, winding rivers, and a vast coastline. The wilderness in Alaska provides a vast playground for the outdoor enthusiast. The eclectic landscapes offer opportunities for challenging adventures and serene natural experiences. Alaska is sadly one of the last remaining frontiers on Earth. But whilst the state provides vast swathes of natural beauty, the wilderness therein can be unforgiving and intimidating to many. Extreme weather conditions, unpredictable wildlife, not used to mankind's interference, and the expansiveness of the wilderness require careful planning, appropriate equipment, respect for the natural environment, and a great level of skill and knowledge. Alaska offers a unique opportunity to lose oneself in the wonders of nature, to experience solitude, beauty and breathtaking grandiosity, and one of the most magnificent places on Earth. For Chris McCandless, his journey into the wild, into the depths of the Alaskan wilderness, would be an unmitigated disaster. A tragic and cruel tale of just how cruel nature can be, if you aren't fully prepared. Christopher Johnson McCandless was born on February the 12th, 1968 in Inglewood, California, although he spent most of his early childhood in El Segundo. Chris was the eldest child of Wilhelmina Marie McCandless, known as Billy to her family and friends, and to his father, Walter McCandless. Chris had a younger sister named Corinne, whom he was particularly close to growing up. From a young age, Chris exhibited a restless spirit and a longing for adventure. He was an intelligent and curious child, often seeking new experiences and questioning the world around him. He had strong and steadfast morals, even from an early age. His keen intellect and voracious appetite for knowledge led him to constantly immerse himself in books and expanding his understanding of the world around. As Chris grew older, he began to question the values and expectations of society, and in particular, his family around him. He witnessed the pursuit of material wealth and the superficiality that often accompanied it, which left him feeling disillusioned and disconnected. Chris's parents, Walt and Billy, inflicted verbal and physical abuse toward each other in their marriage, and also toward their children, fueled in part by Walt's alcoholism. Although to the outside world they projected an image of the perfect American middle-class family. Chris craved a life of purpose and authenticity, one where he could transcend the boundaries of conventional success and conformity, one where he could be free. Chris's craving for adventure was only stoked further by his exposure to nature throughout his childhood. His family would often embark on camping trips during Chris's younger years, immersing themselves in the beauty of nature. Corinne McCandless, Chris's sister, would state in her 2013 biography that the family's camping trips in their childhood was the only time where the family was truly happy and normal. Chris's experience in nature instilled in him a deep appreciation for the world and a sense of wonder and adventure for the untamed wilderness. Chris attended W.T. Woodson High School in Fairfax, Virginia. He performed extremely well academically and held a natural intelligence and thirst for knowledge. A number of Chris's high school teachers and fellow students would later state that Chris, quote, marched to the beat of a different drummer. Given his morals, interests, and intellect, I think nonconformity was a given, and certainly not a negative on his character. Chris served as captain of the cross-country team. Fellow teammates commented on how intense and serious Chris could be at times, giving his fellow cross-country runners the advice, quote, you should treat running as a spiritual exercise in which you are running against the forces of darkness, all the evil in the world, all the hatred. This intensity was shown when Chris and his high school girlfriend split up when she felt that Chris was too intense and serious. This was because Chris had told her that he loved her and wanted to marry her at just the age of 15. Chris felt, however, that despite his achievements, he was amassing an ever-growing sense of restlessness. He commented that he felt as if he were trapped in a world that did not align with his inner desires. This was when he was just 16. As Chris developed into adulthood, his longing for adventure only intensified. He was desperate to escape the chains of conventional life. He wanted to explore uncharted territories and challenge himself in ways that surpassed the mundane routines and expectations of everyday society. Chris spent a significant amount of his teenage free time immersing himself in literature, such as the works of authors who championed a life of simplicity, self-reliance, and spiritual enlightenment. Chris took particular note of authors such as Leo Tolstoy, Henry David Thoreau, and Jack London. The latter's book, Call of the Wild, in particular causing a stirring inside Chris that he couldn't kick. Through the writings of these authors, Chris unearthed a sense of longing within himself to search out freedoms of the wilderness and seek an alternative path that deviated from the society and culture most of us are happy to accept. Their words ignited a fire within him, compelling him to embark on a personal journey of self-discovery and adventure. Chris began to view material possessions as burdens weighing him down and openly questioned the necessity of such absurd trappings. As Chris graduated high school, he became aware that he now had a choice of paths to take. On one hand, Chris knew that he faced the prospect of attending a prestigious university and pursuing a successful career. On the other hand, that voice spoke deep within him of the option of untamed landscapes, unexplored territories, and the call of the wild. Given all I have shared thus far, it would seem pretty apparent as to the direction he would choose. But he didn't. Chris was smart, and he knew that the wilderness would always be there waiting for him. He also knew that a college degree would fare him well in his future. Chris would enroll in Emory University in September of 1986, but in the months between high school and college enrollment, Chris knew he wasn't going to stick around the awful atmosphere his parents brought into their home. So he took off for the summer. Chris travelled by car from his home in Fairfax, Virginia, to Southern California and reconnected with relatives and old friends. Chris had come across a family secret while in California, however. He learned that his father had previously been part of a bigamous marriage, essentially maintaining two separate families at the same time. Walt had also fathered a child with his first wife after the birth of Chris and his sister. This discovery, it is speculated, likely had a profound impact on Chris, and further strains his already negative relationship with his family. Chris eventually returned to the family home, but just 2 days before he was to leave again for college. He arrived, packed his bags, and left almost immediately. Chris would graduate from Emory University in May of 1990 with a bachelor's degree in the double majors of history and anthropology. Chris McCandless now stood at the same crossroads that he stood a few years earlier. He was faced with a decision of what direction to take his life in next. Still disenchanted with the materialistic values he saw around him, he made a daring choice that would forever alter the course of his existence. Chris had paid his way through university with a college fund that was gifted to him by a family friend. Corinne McCandless has stated that the family friend who donated the college fund to Chris did so under the guise of wanting Chris to utilize his intelligence and build a strong career. But in actual fact, whilst this may have been partly true, the family friend also saw how horrible Chris's home life was, and the college fund would be an escape for Chris from his family. Upon completion of his degree, Chris still had over $24,000 remaining in the fund that his parents were hoping he would use to pay towards Harvard Law School, with them contributing the remaining cost. Chris, however, made the radical decision to donate the remainder of his college fund, all $24,000, to Oxfam. This act of generosity was a deliberate step towards detaching himself from material possessions. It was a symbolic shedding of his past life, a metaphorical line in the sand, and as he crossed it, he crossed into the next stage of his life. Chris McCandless left Virginia in the summer of 1990. He drove a beat-up old Datsun West cross-country to California. The car was a piece of junk realistically, and it would often break down during his trip. Chris travelled without car insurance and was driving with expired license plates, in a bold and illegal move. He never got stopped or challenged by police on his journey, however. Chris had reached the Lake Mead National Recreation Area near Las Vegas by the end of August 1990, where a flash flood completely finished off his car. Fearful of fines, or even arrest due to lack of valid license plates and insurance, Chris removed the car's license plates, took all of the belongings he had, and continued his journey on foot, abandoning his car for good. Once authorities found Chris's car, his parents were notified, but with no other information, they could only speculate where their son was. You see, in the months since Chris had left the McCandless family home, they grew increasingly concerned for their son's whereabouts, and had also filed a missing persons report. Chris, however, was paying for everything in cash and kept a low profile off the grid, so it was almost impossible to track. Further, Chris had started to go by the name Alexander Supertramp, further reducing his traceability. After police had recovered Chris's car, the Las Vegas Police Department repaired it and put it into service as an undercover vehicle. Chris immersed himself in true freedom and authentic experiences. He relied on walking, hitchhiking, and a small amount of public transportation to navigate his way through the United States. He embraced a minimalist lifestyle, carrying only the bare essentials and disposing of the burden of unnecessary possessions. From Vegas, Chris traveled northwest, hitchhiking through the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the movie version of Chris's adventure, 2007's Into the Wild, starring Emile Hirsch and directed by Sean Penn, it paints an idealistic and serene story of Chris experiencing a beautiful and innocent journey. Real life, however, wasn't as idealistic. While traveling through the Sierra Nevada range, Chris broke into a closed cabin to steal food, supplies, and money. Forensic evidence found at the scene confirmed him at the scene of the crime. Chris was also suspected of breaking into and robbing a number of other cabins in the area through the autumn and winter of 1990 and 1991, but only the initial robbery was positively confirmed by authorities as being linked to Chris McCandless. Throughout the winter, Chris appears to have lived in hermit camps and with other vagrants throughout the Sierra Nevada region, keeping himself to himself most of the time and socializing with very few others. This may have been to protect himself more than anything else. Chris was driven by great idealism, and even before his departure, he started to live in an almost aesthetic way, giving up wealth and privileges. Chris wasn't naive, though. He knew that the journey would be full of hurdles and peril, but such hardships were necessary for his cause and commitment to it. Perhaps, however, forethought and greater planning may have allowed Chris to avoid getting involved in petty crime to pay for food and goods along the way. In early 91, Chris moved on from the Sierra Nevada area and hitchhiked in a circular direction through Southern California onto Arizona and then north to South Dakota. By South Dakota, Chris was completely broke, but he managed to secure himself a job in the small town of Carthage in Minor County. The job was as a grain elevator operator on a farm, which suited Chris just fine. He worked at the job for the remainder of 1991, until suddenly quitting by leaving a postcard to his manager which read, quote, "Tramping is too easy with all this money. My days were more exciting when I was penniless and had to forage around for my next meal. I've decided that I'm going to live this life for some time to come." Chris headed south to Colorado, where he used some of the money he had earned to buy a kayak, supplies, and a handgun. He rode his kayak down the Colorado River, sans permit, while being pursued by both wild animals and park rangers. Chris felt that it was absurd that he needed a permit to row a boat down a river, and it was a perfect example of how ridiculous society had become. He was right, depending on your outlook, of course. Chris was kayaking with no safety equipment, however, and traversing very dangerous whitewater rapids with no experience. Other travellers and vagabonds he came by on his journey grew concerned for Chris's safety, and a number of them provided the park rangers with updates on his location, aiding them in the search to detain him. Chris McCandless was reported as a person non grata at Lake Havasu, the Bill Williams River, the Colorado River Reservoir, Cibola National Wildlife Refuge, Imperial National Wildlife Refuge, and Yuma Proving Ground. He had rode a distance of around 185 miles, or 298 kilometers. The authorities attempted, but never succeeded in locating Chris. He was always one step ahead. He eventually followed the Colorado River all the way through to Mexico, where he was swept across the international border through a spillway at the Morelos Dam. Duck hunters had to rescue Chris and give him a ride to a small fishing village on the Gulf of California. Chris abandoned his river journey and gave up his kayak, choosing to spend a few days in the village of El Golfo de Santa Clara in the Mexican state of Sonora. Chris found Mexico to be a scary place, however, intimidating, and a language barrier that caused him problems. With no way to support himself, he attempted to re-enter the United States illegally on foot and was caught by border guards. Chris had a firearm in his possession, so was arrested and forced to spend one night in jail, but he was released without charges the following day after his gun was confiscated. Following this experience in Mexico, Chris headed north again, hitchhiking and eventually winding up back in South Dakota. Chris didn't want to flee civilization for good, but only stay away for a while in order to be reborn. Whilst Chris never specifically said it or recorded it in his journal, his sister later commented in her biography that Chris's parents must have been a significant factor in wanting to escape and get away. Chris saw his journey not only as a physical exploration, but also an intellectual and spiritual growth. He voraciously read books during his travels, expanding his knowledge, learning new skills, and deepening his understanding of the world. He devoured a wide range of literature, from philosophical treatises to classic novels, finding inspiration and guidance within the pages of his beloved tomes. Throughout his journey, Chris encountered a diverse array of people from all walks of life. He worked various odd jobs to sustain himself, often taking on menial tasks that provided him with enough income to continue with his nomadic lifestyle. His earnestness, humility, and genuine curiosity allowed him to form deep connections with individuals from all backgrounds, transcending social barriers and fostering a sense of shared humanity. Chris was well liked on the road, and many who befriended him on his journey spoke very highly of Chris and had only positive memories. Chris's journey was not without its challenges and hardships, though. He faced moments of uncertainty, vulnerability, and even danger. Yet he embraced all of these trials and took them at face value to build his character and strengthen his spirit. As Chris continued to venture further into the unknown, his ultimate destination loomed on the horizon, a place that would test his limits and push him to the edge of his physical and emotional boundaries. Chris had it in mind since day one of his journey. It was always the ultimate destination when he was ready for it and prepared enough. The Alaskan wilderness beckoned. In April 1992, Chris hitchhiked from South Dakota to Fairbanks, Alaska. He was spied by many eyewitnesses as to be traveling with a big backpack and would give a false name if he was asked his identity. Alexander Supertramp, don't forget. Those who he met in Alaska described him as acting very suspicious of people around him. He was filthy and smelled awful due to his lack of hygiene. He had become a true super tramp. One witness described Chris as generally strange, weird with a weird energy at this time. Life on the road, life in solitude, and an unpredictable diet can change a man. Chris had changed on the road for the better and for the worse. Chris McCandless was last seen alive at the head of the Stampede Trail on April the 28th, 1992 by a local electrician by the name of Jim Gallion. Fun fact, if you have seen the 2007 movie, Jim Gallion actually plays himself in the movie. Gallion had given Chris a ride from Fairbanks to the start of the rugged track just outside the small town of Healy, Gallion stated. Gallion had also been seriously concerned about the safety of the young adventurer, who introduced himself as Alex Supertramp. He only had a few pieces of equipment and a small backpack. His lack of experience was obvious, said Gallion, who went on that his concern was that Chris just wouldn't survive in the Alaskan wilderness, and he was going into it incredibly naively. Gallion pleaded with Chris on a number of occasions to delay the trip. Gallion even offered to take Chris to Anchorage and buy him suitable equipment and supplies. Chris politely refused Gallion's offer, warnings, and advice. Gallion was, however, able to get Chris to accept a pair of extra tough winter boots and some small food items which accounted to just 2 sandwiches and a packet of corn chips. Nothing of any real sustenance. Gallion dropped Chris off and hoped that he would head back towards the highway within a few days as hunger set in. After hiking along the snow-covered Stampede Trail, Chris came across an abandoned bus about 28 miles west of Healy. He rested at the bus for a while and marked it on his map in case he needed to take shelter at some point. But Chris attempted to continue west until he hit the Bering Sea. However, the thick Alaskan brush forced him back, and Chris ultimately returned to the bus and set up camp, living off the land there for a while. Chris had bought around 10 pounds of white rice with him as supplies, and a Remington nylon 66 semi-automatic rifle with 400 rounds of .22 LR hollow point ammunition, which he would use to hunt for the rest of his food. He also had a book which detailed local plant life and a few items of camping equipment. He wasn't at all prepared for what he was about to face. Chris foraged for edible plants and hunted game including porcupines, squirrels and birds. On June the 9th, 1992, Chris illegally stalked and killed a moose, though the meat spoiled within days after he failed in his efforts to preserve it. Once again, Chris was the suspect in a number of burglaries in several cabins in the area that were stocked with food, survival equipment and emergency supplies. Chief Park Ranger for the area, Ken Kira, has stated that Chris was not a realistic suspect, however, and speculation of his involvement in the burglaries may have been because he was linked to the Sierra Nevada burglaries early on his trip. Chris spent 113 days in the area, and after living in the bus for more than 2 months, Chris decided to head back to civilization in July of 1992. The harsh reality of living life in the wild had waned slightly, faced with the tough and unforgiving daily existence that he discovered. However, upon making his way back, Chris found that the trail was blocked by the now impassable Teclanica River, which had become swollen with late summer runoff from the Cantwell Glacier. When Chris had crossed the river back in April, it was waist deep and flowing gently at a quiet pace. Now the water was above head height and was roaring rapids of white water. Unfortunately, Chris was without a detailed map of the area and was completely unaware of any other way to cross the river. As it happened, there was a manually operated cable car crossing less than half a mile away, but Chris would never discover this. Chris headed back to the bus and re-established his camp. He posted an SOS note on the bus, which read, quote, "Attention possible visitors. SOS, I need your help. I am injured, near death, and too weak to hike out. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you. Chris McCandless. August ? Chris was by now malnourished and slowly starving. Chris had quickly realized the magnitude of the challenges he had come up against. The weather was harsh and unpredictable, with freezing temperatures, heavy rainfall and strong winds. The terrain was rugged and treacherous. The surrounding landscape was dotted with thick forests, tundra and fast-flowing rivers. In the intimate pages of his journal, Chris explored the contradictions within himself, the desire for solitude and the longing for human connection, the pursuit of adventure and the yearning for societal familiarity. Chris continued to document his experiences in his journal, pouring his thoughts and reflections onto the pages. The journal became a confidant, a place where he could explore the depths of his emotions and confront his inner demons. Chris McCandless had evidently had enough of living as a hermit. In the opposite direction of the manual cable car, there was a cabin stocked with food and supplies just 6 miles south of the bus. It was commonly marked on most of the maps in the area. A prime example of Chris's unpreparedness for his journey. Chris began to wish he had taken Jim Gallion's advice and become better prepared. Once Chris has arrived back at the bus on July the 8th, his journal entries became progressively shorter and bleaker. Proclaiming that he is lonely and scared, he continued to hunt and gather edible plants, but he was growing weaker and weaker, expending far more calories than he ate whilst foraging and hunting. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Chris's physical condition was getting extreme. He found it more and more difficult to find enough food to sustain himself and maintain his energy. The small, meager, and by now mainly plant-based meals he managed to scrounge were not enough to nourish his body, and he grew progressively weaker. Food was becoming increasingly scarce, and he struggled to find enough sustenance. Chris longed to be saved. He craved human companionship and the emotional connection. As winter approached and the harshness of the Alaskan wilderness intensified, Chris's physical and mental strength waned. The horrific temperatures and scarcity of food took their toll on Chris's thin, weak frame. Chris could barely move at all. His energy was completely depleted, his appearance skeletal. Tragically, on an unknown day sometime in the autumn of 1992, Chris McCandless surrendered to the harsh wilderness. 132 days after Chris McCandless was last seen, his body was discovered by hunters, entombed in his sleeping bag and alone on the bus that he called home for the last 3 months of his life. The hunters who had read the note left by Chris entered the bus and found Chris's lifeless body. The cause of Chris McCandless's death was debated for many years. Initially, Chris was suspected of starving to death, but this was quickly revised, and then it was thought that Chris had eaten a poisonous plant. However, John Krakauer, the author of Into the Wild, conducted detailed research into what had happened to Chris McCandless. Based on journal entries that detailed his food sources, he believes that Chris may have eaten poisonous hedis, or alpine wild potato seeds. In a healthy person, the seeds may not have been dangerous, as the toxin is then usually rendered ineffective by stomach acid and gut bacteria. However, following forensic testing on the vegetation found in the area of the bus that Chris died in, Krakauer published his definitive belief, substantiated with scientific evidence, that Chris has died due to consuming a poisonous mold that grows on the wild potato seed plant. In the months following the discovery of Chris's body, many people would criticize his recklessness and lack of thought or empathy towards his family. They questioned the wisdom of his decisions and the impact of his actions on those who cared for him. Others saw Chris as a folk hero, making a giant leap that many of us would like to do, but very few have the confidence to follow through on. Chris's story continues to resonate deeply with individuals across the globe. Sparking introspection and soul-searching, it compels many to re-evaluate their own lives in the pursuit of their dreams. The story of Chris McCandless is a reminder to us all of the complexities of the human spirit, the longing for freedom or authenticity, and the delicate balance between self-discovery and inner acceptance. God bless you, Alexander Supertramp.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to our show tonight. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your chosen podcast platform and subscribe to our show so that you never miss an episode. Our shows aren't sponsored by any company or corporation, so any support you can give us goes a long way in supporting the work that we do. From all of us here at Dead Souls, sleep tight.